Hi, and welcome to a lecture on global marketing. This is from the Global Marketing book, the fourth edition, and we are going to review social and cultural environments in the global market. So, the United States and France have a relationship dating back hundreds of years. In the late 1700s, the French troops helped the American defeat the British at the Battle of Yorktown. And then in the 20th century, the United States returned the favor by helping to liberate France from Hitler's army. But unfortunately, the US and France now have a chilly phase. In the months after President Bush ordered military action in Iraq, the relationship changed because the Bush administration was upset, to put it mildly, that President Jacques Chirac did not support the decision to infiltrate Iraq. This is due in large because the French citizen did not feel threatened by global terror networks. Some other points of disapproval were opposition to the death penalty and disapproval of the profit motive of American companies, and also the threat of American lifestyle eating habits and what it did to France's culinary traditions. This resulted in what we are calling the Big Chill. And this is an example between the US and French relations, and it's showing that differences in social and cultural environments or a cultural gap impacts marketing opportunities globally. The world's cultures are categorized by two differences and similarities. So the task of the global marketer is twofold. First, marketers must study and understand the country's cultures in which they are doing business. And secondly, this understanding must be incorporated into marketing planning processes. Deep cultural understanding can be a competitive advantage for global companies. So, why do cultural factors challenge global marketers? Because many of them are hidden, because culture is a learned behavior and is passed on from generation to generation, and it can be difficult from an unexperienced or untrained outsider. So I put this image up, just like finding culture can sometimes be hard, to see if you could find the hidden image in this photo. And you can kind of see a glimpse of a house and you see a wheel, but you really have to look and you really have to kind of focus. And that's the point that we're trying to drive home with culture here. To the untrained or unexperienced eye that's not used to looking for different signs and traits, is something that can easily be missed, especially if you don't have much exposure to different cultures. So, what does culture include? It's the conscious and unconscious values, attitudes, ideas, and symbols that shape human behavior and that are transmitted from one generation to another. It makes sense to learn about culture from studying the attitudes, beliefs, and values shared by a group of people. So, an attitude is a learned tendency to respond in a consistent way to give an objective to a given object or entity. And a belief is an organized pattern of knowledge that a person holds true about the world. A value can be defined as an enduring belief or a feeling that a specific mode of conduct is, personally or socially. Attitudes are clusters of interrelated beliefs. Attitudes and beliefs are closely related to values. Religion is one important source of society's beliefs, attitudes, and values. And the world has a ton of major religions, and you can see some of them listed here: Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, to name a few. So how does religion play a part in marketing? So for example, Hindus do not eat beef. So for the McDonald's that are in the Hindu markets, they don't serve beef to their customers because it would be culturally negligent to do so. The overall sense of what beauty is versus what it's not, what represents good taste versus bad taste, what represents obscenities, and so on, is known as aesthetics. So here on the screen, there are a couple of images. The one on the left of the young lady, some may say that she's the idea of beauty. the little kitty cat in the middle. Some may say that that's an ugly cat, others may find it enduring. And then there's a photo on the bottom, which some people may find as obscene, another person may find it as a beautiful work of art. Aesthetic perceptions should be taken into account when making decisions about product packaging and any other brand related communications that these decisions fit into a particular culture. Cultural influences are especially apparent in food preparation, consumption patterns, and habits. Having a solid understanding of food related cultural preferences is important for a company that markets food or beverage products globally. So, an example of a market failure: the US introduced mixes for fluffy frosted cakes to the UK, where cake is eaten at a time with fingers rather than a dessert and a fork. So instead of having a product that could just be easily eaten because that's what's done in that culture, they designed the product or the dessert to be much like it's consumed in the United States, and that was a failure. Another example is Green Giant Foods. They attempted to market corn in Europe, but the overall attitude of corn in Europe is that it's grain fed to hogs and not to people. So, needless to say, that was a bad marketing concept because the culture of Europe was not taken into account. The diversity of cultures around the world is reflected in language. A study to learn a culture's language and literature can be the next best thing without actually visiting a country or a region. So I'll say that again: to learn the most you can without actually visiting a place or a culture, you can learn about their language, and that's said to be the next best thing according to the text. So language has been divided up into the study of spoken or verbal language in four main areas, and that is syntax, semantics, phonology, and morphology. Unspoken or nonverbal languages includes things like gestures, touching, and other forms of body language. Universal aspects of cultural environments represent opportunities for global marketers to standardize some or all elements of a marketing program. Widespread preferences include convenience for food, disposable products, popular music and movies in the US, Europe, and Asia suggest that many products have a universal appeal. Now let's talk a little bit about high and low context cultures. Edward T. Hall has suggested the concept of high and low context as a way of understanding different cultural orientations. In low context culture, messages are explicit and specific words carry most of the communication power. In high context cultures, less information is contained in the verbal part of a message. Much more information resides in the context of communication, including the background, the associations, and the basic values of communication. So I've got examples here. You can see on the left-hand side are high context cultures, and those include Japan and Saudi Arabia. And they place a great deal on a person's value and position in their place in society. So in this type of a culture, a business loan is most likely to be based on who you are rather than on a formal analysis of a financial documentation. In contrast, on the right-hand side, we have low context cultures, cultures such as Germany and France and the United States. So in these cultures, business deals are made with much less information about character, background, and the values of participants, and are more heavily based on financial documents. But perhaps if we ask ourselves, if we took into account a person's values and their character, that would be a pretty good indication as to if they were going to be financially stable or responsible with their finances. So, a person typically maybe that is a liar or that cheats may not be the best person you want to give a loan to if you're a financial institution. Just saying, something to think about. Next, we'll look at Hofstede's cultural typology. Hofstede is well known for research studies of social values, suggesting that the cultures of different nations can be compared in terms of 5 dimensions. They are, and we will go through them, but you can see them on the screen: PDI, IDV, MAS, and FEM, UAI, and LTO. So first we have PDI. Power distance is the extent to which the less powerful members of a society accept or even expect power to be distributed unequally. Hong Kong and France are high-powered distant cultures. On the other hand, Germany, Austria, Netherlands, and Scandinavia are low-power distant countries. IDV is the second dimension, and it's a reflection of the degrees to which individuals in a society are integrated into groups. Individual cultures, each member of society is primarily concerned with his or her own interests and those of their immediate family. In collective cultures, all of society's members are integrated into cohesive groups. So high individualism is a general aspect in the US and Europe, and Japanese and Asian cultures tend to have a low individualism cultural patterns. Masculinity and femininity are the third dimensions and describe a society in which men are expected to be assertive, competitive, and concerned with material success, while women fulfill the role of a nurturer and are concerned with issues such as the welfare of the children. That's the masculinity culture. The femininity describes a society in which the social roles of men and women kind of overlap. So Japan and Austria ranked highest in masculinity dimensions, while Spain, Taiwan, and the Netherlands ranked lowest in masculinity dimensions. So depending on what kind of family you like to have, if you have a masculinity culture thought pattern, then living in Japan and Austria would be perfect for you. Otherwise, if you're more of a femininity mindset, then like I said, places like Scandinavia or the Netherlands would be maybe an ideal place for you to raise your family. UAI is uncertainty avoidance, and is the extent to which the members of a society are uncomfortable with unclear, ambiguous, or unstructured situations. Greek, Portugal, and Latin American countries rank high in uncertainty avoidance. And lastly, we have LTO. Long-term values include persistent, defined as general tenacity in the pursuit of a goal. Ordering relationships by status reflects the presence of social hierarchies, and observing this order indicates acceptance of complementary relations. So by studying Hofstede's work and using these 5 dimensions, marketers gain insight that they can guide them in a range of activities, including including product development, interacting with joint venture partners, and conducting sales meetings. All important factors when we're dealing with social and cultural environments on a global platform. Next, let's talk a little bit about the self-reference criterion and perception, also known as SRC. So James Lee developed and published in 1966 a framework for systematically reducing perceptual blockage and distortion because of a person's own cultural experience. Lee termed the unconscious reference to one's own cultural values the self-reference criterion, or SRC. To address this problem and eliminate or reduce cultural phobias, he proposed this 4-part framework. And that is defining the problem or goal in terms of home country cultural traits and habits and norms. The second one is the exact same, define the problem or goal in terms of home country cultural traits, habits, and norms, but making no value judgments. The third one is isolate the SRC influence and examine it carefully to see how it complements the problem. And then lastly, we have redefine the problem without the SRC influence and solve for the host country market situation. So the lesson that SRC really teaches us is that it's a vital critical skill of a global marketer in being and having an unbiased perception and the ability to see what is so in a particular culture. It is critical to the global marketer because of widespread tendency toward ethnocentrism and the use of self-reference criterion. The SRC can be a powerful negative force in global business And forgetting to check it can lead to misunderstandings and ultimately failure if you're looking to do business in a global market. So keeping a self-reference criterion in mind is important for a global marketer. The diffusion theory. So this was reviewed by a socialist, Everett Rogers, about individuals who adopt new ideas and discovered a pattern called diffusion of innovations. Roger broke the research into concepts that are useful to global marketers. So there are 5 stages. Well, the first concept is the adoption process. And the adoption process is the mental stages through which an individual passes from the time of his or her first knowledge of an innovation to the time of product adoption or purchase. The 5 stages an individual passes through are awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, and adoption. So let's talk a little bit about what those mean. In awareness, the customer becomes aware for the first time of the product or innovation. In the interest phase, the customer is interested in learning more about focusing their attention on communications related to the product. So now you have a little bit of interest, the consumer is intrigued. In the evaluation phase, the customer mentally assesses the product's benefits in relation to present and anticipated future needs. And based on this judgment, they decide right then and there whether they want it or not. During the trial, most customers will not purchase expensive products without a hands-on experience. So an example of this would be you need a new car. No one would rarely ever just go and buy a car. You need a test drive first. So this would be included in the trial phase. And then finally, we have the adoption phase. The customer either makes the purchase or adopts or continues with brand loyalty of a less expensive product. The next concept is the characteristics of innovations. In addition to the adoption process, Rogers identifies 5 major factors affecting the rate at which innovations are adopted. They are relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, divisibility, and communability. So relative advantage is how a new product compares with existing products in the eyes of the customer. Compatibility, the extent to which a product is consistent with existing values and past experiences of a product. Complexity, the degree to which an innovation or new product is difficult to understand and use. Having a great new product that nobody can use because it's so complex that they don't understand it kind of defeats the point. So you definitely want something that creates a need that a consumer currently doesn't have, but yet you can't overcomplicate it in such a way that no one will be able to even understand how to use it. That'd be counterproductive. Divisibility, the ability of a product to be tried and used on a limited basis without great expense. So oftentimes you see samples, especially of foods, they will give away maybe single servings. This is kind of an example of divisibility, letting the consumer be able to test it, if you will, similar to the trial period, without exerting a ton of expenses or even having it be free. Communability, the degree to which benefits of an innovation or the value of a product may be communicated to a potential market. Obviously, having a product that no one knows about is a problem. So being able to have different venues or platforms for communication is going to be important. And lastly, we have the adopter categories. These are classifications of individuals within a market on the basis of their innovativeness. So these 5 categories are assigned for this, representing a normal distribution. The first 2.5% to purchase are known as innovators. The next 13.5% are early adopters. The next 34% are considered the early majority, followed by the next 34%, they're the late majority. And then finally, the last 16% are known as the laggards. You can see here that the 13.5% of early adopters it stands out. The font's a little bit bigger and it's bolder, and that's because this is a critical group in the adoption process. because they have major influence over early and late majority. Early adopters tend to be younger, with higher social status, and in a more favorable financial status. From a marketing manager's perception, steps taken to persuade innovators and early adopters to purchase a product are critical to the success of that product. This concludes the lecture from Global Marketing 4th edition in the chapter of Social and Cultural Environments. I hope you've learned a great deal on how to either conduct yourselves or market a product in a global environment based on social and cultural differences. Thank you for tuning in.